They told you empathy was your greatest strength. They told you your heart was a gift, that your ability to feel, to sense, to carry the emotions of others like they were your own, that it made you rare, that it made you special, that it made you good. But they never told you what it would cost. They never told you that empathy, when unconsciously driven, is not a virtue. It's a contract written in the ink of invisible wounds, a silent deal with the past. If I give enough, maybe I won't be abandoned again. If I hold enough, maybe someone will finally hold me. If I love enough, maybe I'll be remembered when I'm gone. You gave because you thought that was the only way to be seen. You gave not from overflow, but from absence, from fear, from the unbearable silence of being invisible in a world that only praises what it can use. And so you became useful. You became emotionally available, unquestionably present, hyper-attuned to the subtle shifts in other people's moods. You became a savior in slow motion. You learned how to anticipate pain before it was spoken, how to soothe wounds you didn't create, how to say yes when your soul was screaming no. And somewhere in the chaos of all that giving, you disappear. Not dramatically, not loudly, but gradually, piece by piece, boundary by boundary, until all that remained was a reflection of other people's needs, curated empathy masquerading as identity. You started to measure your worth by your usefulness, by how much weight you could carry, by how quiet you could remain while others screamed. You wore your self-abandonment like a badge of honor. You called it loyalty. You called it love. But it wasn't love. It was survival, a strategy you learned when you were too young to name it. When the room grew cold and your emotions weren't welcome. When you realized that to be accepted, you had to become what others needed, even if it meant killing off parts of yourself in the process. You were never taught that empathy without self-awareness is exploitation. That when you don't know the roots of your own pain, your giving becomes a transaction. You give to avoid guilt. You give to avoid rejection. You give so you don't have to sit with the haunting thought, maybe if I stop giving, they'll forget I was ever here. But here's the truth you've buried beneath years of emotional labor. Empathy is not love if it costs you your identity. Compassion is not noble if it becomes your prison. And giving is not sacred if it's born from a fear of being erased. Carl Jung said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That is the shadow of empathy, the part no one speaks of, the hidden resentment behind your smile, the fatigue in your soul, the anger you swallow because good people don't get angry, the rage that leaks through in passive words, in breakdowns, in quiet nights when you are finally alone and the silence becomes unbearable. You've been living in syphoria, a psychological euphoria that comes from emotional sacrifice, from being needed, from being the one who holds it all together. But this high is not freedom. It is addiction, the addictiveness of martyrdom, of being everything for everyone except yourself. And the world will praise you for it. They will feed on your empathy like wolves cloaked in gratitude. They will call you angel, healer, empath, but they will not ask what it's costing you to wear those names, because they don't want to know, because your pain makes them uncomfortable, because your silence makes their world easier. So you keep giving, you keep bending, you keep bleeding, and they keep forgetting, not because they're cruel, but because you taught them how to treat you. You trained them to believe your needs didn't exist. You trained them to think you were endless. You trained them to believe that your giving came from abundance, when really it came from terror. Terror of being left behind. Terror of being unloved. Terror of finally asking for what you need and hearing nothing in return. But that fear is not your truth. It's your wound. And it's time you stopped serving it. Because the dark truth is this: you cannot love others into loving you. You cannot pour enough to be filled. You cannot disappear enough to be seen. You must stop abandoning yourself for the illusion of closeness. You must stop confusing sacrifice for connection. You must stop mistaking obligation for intimacy. And that starts with a question so simple it might break you. What if you stopped giving? What if you stopped over-explaining? What if you stopped saying yes when your whole body said no? What if you let people feel the weight of your boundaries? Would they stay? Would they care? Would they notice? That fear, the one rising in your throat right now, that's the place. That's the wound. That's where you begin. Because real empathy, the kind that transforms, not drains, starts at home. It starts with you learning to sit with your own pain before absorbing someone else's. It starts with you choosing yourself, even when it costs you admiration. It starts with you saying enough, not out of anger, but out of clarity. Because love given out of fear is not love. It is survival dressed in sentiment. And survival is not the life you came here to live. You came here to thrive, to feel, to connect, not to prove your worth through your suffering. The world does not need more empaths who bleed themselves dry. It needs whole people fierce in their boundaries, sacred in their self-respect, grounded in the knowing that their presence is not earned through pain. And that begins with you. No more giving to be remembered. No more softening to be safe. No more shrinking to be seen. Stand in your truth. Reclaim your name. And remember, you were never forgettable. You were just too afraid to be seen in your fullness. Because fullness terrifies those who benefit from your fragmentation. You see, when you begin to reclaim your boundaries, when you stop being the echo of other people's emotions and start becoming the voice of your own truth, something radical happens. You become unfamiliar, uncomfortable, uncontainable. And those who were drawn to your self-abandonment will recoil. Not because you've changed for the worse, but because they can no longer manipulate the version of you that no longer exists. The one who apologized for having needs. The one who smiled through depletion. The one who called it loyalty when it was really self-erasure. But this is not your loss. It is your liberation. Because the ones who only stayed for what they could take were never staying for who you truly are. And who you are, in your totality, is not here to be consumed. You are not a feeling to be extracted, not a safe place for those who won't build their own. You are not emotional shelter for storms you didn't create. You are not here to hold the world while your own spine cracks under the weight of pretending to be okay. You are here to live fully, loudly, wildly in your truth. And that means letting go of the performance, letting go of being the strong one, letting go of being the healer, the fixer, the emotional dumping ground. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to exist without justifying your existence. That isn't selfish. That's sacred, because you cannot continue to heal others while neglecting your own bleeding. You cannot continue to carry the emotional aftermath of people who will never ask where it lands in your body. This is where belief must change. The belief that your worth is tied to your usefulness. The belief that love is earned by your suffering. The belief that you must bleed to belong. These beliefs were not born in truth. They were born in trauma, handed down through lineage, molded through childhood, reinforced by a culture that thrives on the unpaid labor of empaths and caretakers, on the silent suffering of those who think that love means giving until nothing is left. But love is not depletion. Love is not burnout. Love is not sacrificing yourself so others can be whole. Love is truth. And truth, by its nature, is disruptive. You disrupt when you stop saying yes out of guilt. You disrupt when you stop rescuing people from consequences. You disrupt when you stop holding space for those who refuse to hold themselves. And in that disruption, you reclaim the deepest kind of empathy, the kind that honors both you and the other person, the kind that says, I see your pain, but I will not abandon myself to fix it. I hear your story, but I will not lose my voice in its telling. I feel your sorrow, but I will not wear it like skin. This is self-love with a backbone. This is compassion with discernment. This is presence without sacrifice. Because the truth is, you don't owe your soul to anyone. And if someone only feels loved when you are empty, that is not love. That is consumption. That is control dressed in dependency. And you are not here to be consumed. You are here to create, to expand, to feel what it means to be alive in your own body without apology. And yes, there will be grief. There will be guilt. There will be echoes of the old patterns, the old identity, the old you pleading for one more performance. But you will not perform. You will breathe. You will pause. You will stand in the silence of your reclaimed self and let the noise pass through you like wind through a canyon. You will remember that you are not here to be remembered by everyone. You are here to remember yourself. And when you do, when you finally come home to that place inside you that does not need to be earned, fixed, praised, or forgiven, you will begin to give again. But not to be needed, not to be liked, not to be remembered. You will give from fullness. You will give from overflow. You will give without losing yourself. And that kind of empathy, the kind that doesn't destroy you, is the rarest kind of power. It's the kind of power that terrifies takers, because they cannot steal from someone who knows their own worth. They cannot manipulate someone who doesn't need to be needed. They cannot forget someone who is no longer afraid of being forgotten. You don't give because you fear being erased. You give because you are no longer trying to prove you exist. You already know you do. You feel it in every boundary you keep, in every breath you take before saying yes, in every step you walk away from what no longer honors you. You are no longer giving to be remembered. You are remembering yourself so fully that you no longer need to give to be seen. And that is the most terrifying, liberating, beautiful thing you will ever do. Because once you cross that threshold, once you begin giving from truth rather than trauma, something in you becomes untouchable. Not because you harden, but because you've clarified. You've drawn a line, not in anger, but in reverence. You've whispered to yourself, I will not lose me again. And the moment that promise is made, the spell breaks, the pattern dissolves. The loop that kept you circling the same emotional drain for years stops. Because now you see clearly the savior complex, the overgiving, the chronic empathy. It wasn't just kindness. It was a coping mechanism, a shield, a distraction, a way to control the chaos by making yourself indispensable to it. But the irony is being indispensable never made you safe. It made you invisible. Because when people love you only for what you give, they don't love you. They love their version of you, the echo, the utility, the emotional sponge. And that is not love. That is survival dressed in sentiment. But now you are no longer surviving. You are remembering that your needs are sacred, that your presence is holy, that your truth is not a disruption, it's your compass. You are learning the radical art of unlearning, of dismantling the lie that you must earn your place in the world, that you must prove your goodness through pain, that you must be small to make others comfortable, because shrinking for safety is still a form of suffocation. And love, true love, does not require your silence. So you stop dimming, you stop apologizing, you stop negotiating your worth in spaces that could never hold you fully. You speak, you take up space, you sit at your own table and finally taste the truth of your own existence, rich, complex, undiluted. And it changes everything. The way you walk into rooms, the way you hold eye contact, the way you no longer chase, convince, or prove. You become calm. Not because you don't feel, but because you've stopped leaking energy. You become powerful, not through control, but through self-ownership. You become magnetic, not by being agreeable, but by being aligned. And some will leave. Let them, because their love was conditional. And your presence is no longer for sale. You are not their mirror anymore. You are not their emotional crutch. You are not their project, their therapist, their savior. You are you, unfiltered, unperformed, unshakable. And in that stillness, in that reclaiming, you meet a version of yourself you forgot existed, the one who doesn't need to earn rest, or ask permission to breathe, or wait for validation before moving. She is already whole. He's already enough. They are already seen. And that is the secret to ending the cycle. The great remembering. You stop asking to be remembered. You remember yourself, fiercely, faithfully, fully. And in that remembering, empathy returns not as currency, not as sacrifice, but as truth. You don't love people to avoid abandonment. You love them because it is your nature to love. You don't give to keep the peace. You give because you are at peace. You don't lose yourself for belonging. You belong to yourself so deeply that you can finally connect without condition. And now, empathy becomes clear-eyed, bonded, grounded. It knows when to stay and when to walk. It knows when to help and when to hold back. It knows the difference between sacrifice and self-respect. Because this version of empathy is not soft. It is strong. It is ruthless with truth. It is quiet, but unshakable. It no longer whispers, please don't forget me. It declares, I have never forgotten who I am. And from that place, you finally begin to live, not as a reflection of what the world wanted from you, but as the embodiment of everything you were always meant to be. Whole, worthy, unforgettable. And now, without begging, you are remembered, not for what you gave away to be loved, but for the power of what you refuse to lose. Your silence speaks louder now than all your previous apologies. Your boundaries communicate more clearly than all the words you used to patch broken connections. Your stillness, once mistaken for absence, is now a thunder that commands presence. Because when you choose yourself, truly and entirely, the world begins to reconfigure around you. Not instantly, but inevitably. The people who once clung to the broken version of you begin to fall away, not because you've become distant, but because you've become authentic. And authenticity repels the parasitic. It reveals the transactional. It dismantles the illusions that kept you tied to places that demanded your self-betrayal in exchange for proximity. But this is not the end. It's the revelation, the shedding of what was never love, what was never empathy, what was never you. And when that shedding is done, when your skin no longer fits the roles you were forced to play, you begin again from truth, from clarity, from the unmoving center of your own soul. You no longer have to be the one who cares more, the one who texts first, the one who explains themselves in circles. You are not afraid of being misunderstood. You are not afraid of being alone. Because now you know solitude is not punishment. It is preparation. In solitude, you rewire. In solitude, you recalibrate. In solitude, you remember how to speak in your own voice again, not the one softened by guilt or shaped by fear, but the one forged in the furnace of your own remembering. You no longer need to be the emotional custodian of the room. You no longer feel responsible for the moods of others. You no longer feel guilt for walking away from chaos you didn't create. Because you understand, empathy does not mean absorbing the poison to prove your purity. Empathy does not mean sacrificing yourself on the altar of someone else's healing. Empathy means standing in your truth while witnessing someone else's pain. It means remaining whole, even in the face of their fragmentation. It means seeing their suffering without offering your soul as a solution. You can care without collapsing. You can love without losing. You can give without forgetting. Because now you are anchored. And from that anchoring, something rare emerges, an unshakable presence. The kind of presence that does not ask for permission. The kind that doesn't perform. The kind that makes people feel seen without you having to abandon yourself to do it. Because you've done the work. You've gone into the depths. You've wrestled with the shadows. And you didn't come out untouched. You came out whole. And wholeness doesn't beg. It doesn't apologize. It doesn't explain. It's simply island. And now that you are whole, your empathy no longer comes with an asterisk. You no longer love to be loved back. You no longer give to be remembered. You no longer abandon yourself to keep a seat at tables that can't hold your truth. You've built your own table. And now, only those who bring truth may sit. Only those who see the real you without the costume, without the compliance, are allowed into your kingdom. Because you are not a servant to anyone's expectations anymore. You are the sovereign of your own soul. And that sovereignty, it changes everything. It draws in the aligned. It silences the false. It sets fire to the cages you once called connection. And what's left is freedom. Raw, radical, uncompromising. The kind of freedom that allows you to love, give, hold, and feel not from fear of being forgotten, but from the joy of being remembered by you. Because when you remember yourself, the world begins to remember you too. Not the version you curated to be safe, but the version you buried to survive. She's back now. He's back now. And this time, they're not leaving. And this time, they're not bending. Not for approval. Not for comfort. Not for the illusion of closeness that demands self-erasure in return. They've returned with fire in their chest and truth on their tongue. Not loud, but undeniable. Not boastful, but immovable. This time, you are not performing to be loved. You are being, and love flows to you as a natural response to that truth. You are not begging to be seen. You are standing so fully in your essence, the world cannot look away. And if it does, you do not chase, because the ones who turn from truth were never your audience. They were never meant to hold the weight of your soul. You are no longer trying to prove that your softness is strength. You are living it. You are no longer trying to explain that your boundaries are love. You are embodying it. You are no longer apologizing for your need to be met, held, witnessed, and honored, because those needs are no longer negotiable. You don't fear being forgotten now, because you know you are unforgettable. Not for how much you gave, not for how much you tolerated, but for how deeply you remembered who you were after everyone else forgot. That is your power now. Not what you give away, but what you've reclaimed, your peace, your voice, your wholeness. And in that wholeness, your empathy is no longer a wound reaching for healing. It is a force, a sacred fire, a divine, discerning light that shines not to be seen, but because that is its nature. And so you give, not from lack, but from abundance. You love, not from fear, but from freedom. You stay, not to be needed, but because your presence is a choice. And you walk away not to punish, but because your soul no longer negotiates with places that require you to disappear. This is your becoming, not a return to who you were, but the rise of who you've always been. And no one, not the world, not your past, not your pain, can take that from you now. You are not giving to be remembered. You are giving because you finally remember who you are. And that memory, that is your revolution. So now, you walk not ahead of yourself, not behind your worth, but with it. Each step a ceremony, each breath a reclamation, each silence a declaration that says, I am no longer for sale. Not my peace, not my presence, not my empathy. You have crossed the threshold where fear once ruled. You have stood in the fire of your forgetting and emerged with a name no one gave you and no one can take. You are no longer the echo. You are the source. You are no longer the aftermath of someone else's chaos. You are the architect of your own stillness. And now, everything changes. Not because the world bends to meet you, but because you no longer bend to fit it. You sit in your truth like a throne. You speak your boundaries like scripture. You wear your enoughness like skin. You are not the person who gives to be remembered. You are the soul who remembers. And that remembering is eternal. We grow up believing that love is a meeting of souls, that one day someone will arrive like a divine answer to a silent prayer, and in their eyes we will finally see ourselves whole, complete, unbroken. But here's the truth that almost no one tells you. Love, as most people experience it, is not about the other person. It's about the wound you've been carrying your entire life. You don't fall in love with a person. You fall in love with the way they fit into the cracks of your pain, the way their presence echoes the lullabies you never heard, the safety you never had, the validation you were starved for. And because of that, the person is never really the point. They are the stage on which your unconscious plays out its oldest story over and over again. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Most people call it romance. They think they found destiny when all they've found is a mirror, a living reflection of the part of themselves they've tried to bury. And mirrors, if you don't understand them, can look a lot like gods. Look closely at the people you've loved the most, and you will see patterns, different faces, different names, same gravitational pull. It's not random, it's not coincidence. It is your psyche, still trying to resolve something it never got to resolve in childhood. That's why the same type of pain repeats in your relationships, not because the world is cruel, but because your wound is still open, and the unconscious is relentless in its search for closure. And here's the brutal part. The unconscious doesn't care if the closure comes through healing or through destruction. It will walk you straight into the arms of someone who will shatter you if it believes that somehow in that breaking it can complete its story. This is why some of the most intoxicating loves are also the most dangerous. They awaken the wound so powerfully that you mistake the chaos for depth, the anxiety for passion, the instability for fate. But love that comes from a wound is never free. It binds you, not because of who they are, but because of what they represent. You're not addicted to them. You're addicted to the feeling of finally being seen, even if that seeing is inconsistent, distorted, or cruel. That's why when they withdraw, you don't just feel rejection, you feel annihilation. It's not the loss of them that destroys you. It's the loss of the part of yourself you believed they made real. You have to understand this. Until you face the wound, every relationship will be a reenactment. It doesn't matter how charming they are, how much they swear they love you, how strong the chemistry feels. If they are the salve for your oldest pain, they will also be the knife. Because the wound is not in them, it's in you. This is why true healing changes the way you love. When you make peace with the parts of yourself that were abandoned, neglected, or unloved, you stop seeking people to fill those voids. You no longer mistake longing for compatibility. You stop chasing the ghost of your childhood through the bodies of lovers. You begin to see people for who they are, not for the role your unconscious has cast them in. But here's the paradox. The moment you stop needing someone to heal you is the moment you become capable of real love. Not the desperate, feverish attachment that fades the moment they disappoint you, but a love that is steady, clear-eyed, and free. A love that does not collapse when they walk out the door, because it was never about them completing you. The truth is, the people who hurt you the most in love were never just lovers. They were archetypes. They were the embodiment of your unresolved past. And the day you finally see that, the spell breaks, not because you hate them, but because you realize they were only ever a messenger. A painful, unforgettable messenger, yes, but a messenger nonetheless. Some people will hear this and feel despair. They will think, so love is an illusion? But that's not the point. The point is that the love you thought you lost was never love in its purest form. It was the drama of your wound. And when you learn to separate the two, you gain something infinitely more valuable than another romantic high. You gain yourself. Because in the end, every heartbreak is a mirror. Every obsession, every longing, every person you swore was the one was actually a part of you calling you home. And the day you answer that call is the day you stop chasing ghosts and start living free. They call it love at first sight, as if the soul has some supernatural radar for destiny. But more often, what we call love at first sight is recognition. Not recognition of them, but of the wound they carry that speaks to yours. It's like two ancient scars brushing against each other in the dark. Your mind doesn't register it consciously, but your body does. It's the inexplicable pull towards someone whose chaos feels like home because in some way it island. You've lived with that chaos before. You grew up inside it. And so when you feel that electric rush, that magnetic collision, you think, this must be fate. But really, it's familiarity. Jung would call it the shadow dance, the unconscious parts of yourself you've denied, projected onto another human being. You see them and think they're extraordinary. But what you're really seeing is the buried, unlived parts of you shining back in their eyes. That's why you can't get enough of them. You think they're the missing piece, but they're actually the missing mirror. And here's where it gets dangerous. The shadow doesn't come into your life to make you comfortable, it comes to wake you up. And the awakening doesn't happen through ease and harmony. It happens through friction, through the places where they don't meet your needs, through the ways they trigger your deepest fears. Because those fears are the doorway to what you've been avoiding your entire life. You think you're chasing love, but you're chasing yourself through the labyrinth of another person. And like all labyrinths, it's easy to get lost. You start mistaking their approval for your worth. You start thinking their inconsistency is a test you need to pass, that if you can finally earn their love, you'll heal every rejection you've ever felt. This is why you stay when you should walk away. Because walking away doesn't feel like losing them. It feels like losing the unfinished story you've been carrying since childhood. It's the story that says, if I try harder, they'll see me. If I become perfect, they won't leave. If I love enough, they'll finally love me back. That's not love. That's reenactment. It's the unconscious dragging you back into the same emotional battlefield again and again, hoping this time you'll emerge victorious. But you can't win a war that ended decades ago. The people you're fighting now are not the original enemy. They're just playing the role your psyche handed them. And yet, there is a way out. It's not found in finding the right person, but in turning toward the wound and asking it what it's been trying to tell you. Because the wound is not your enemy, it is your oracle. It holds the map to every choice you've made, every relationship you've clung to, every heartbreak you've endured. It's been guiding you all along, just not toward lovers, but toward your own integration. The moment you stop trying to fix the wound through another person, the spell breaks. You realize the chaos wasn't passion, it was a craving for a home you never had. You realize their hot and cold wasn't mystery. It was the same unpredictability that defined your earliest relationships. You realize you were not madly in love. You were madly in search of yourself. And here's the beauty. When you heal, your taste in love transforms. You no longer feel drawn to intensity disguised as intimacy. You stop romanticizing the people who keep you guessing, because you finally see that guessing is just anxiety in a prettier costume. You stop calling emotional starvation chemistry, and you start recognizing that real love often feels calm. Calm, a word so foreign to the wounded heart that it can feel boring at first. Because you're used to storms. You're used to the high of being chosen and the crash of being discarded. But calm is where love lives. Calm is where trust grows. Calm is where you realize that being valued isn't something you have to earn. It's something you're given freely, without performance. And that's when you understand the dark truth in full. It was never about them. It was always about the wound. And once the wound is seen, felt, and healed, you stop chasing people who hurt you. You stop begging for scraps. You stop making your heart a stage for the same old play. You finally step out of the script and into your own life. And when love comes again, and it will not come to complete you. It will come to walk beside you. The wound once faced becomes alchemy. Not the kind sung about in cheap self-help slogans, but the real kind, the kind ancient mystics spoke of when they whispered that lead could be turned into gold. Because that's what the wound is. Lead. Heavy, dull, poisonous if ingested. A burden you carry without realizing it has been shaping the curve of your spine and the course of your life. But once you stop running from it, once you hold it in your hands without flinching, it begins to change. You start to see that every betrayal, every abandonment, every time you were overlooked or discarded was not just cruelty, it was a lesson in sight. It trained your eyes to see what others cannot. It carved in you a sensitivity to the undercurrents of human behavior that people without your history will never possess. And here's the irony. The very same wound that once drew you toward people who hurt you can, when healed, make you immune to them. You will feel their chaos before they speak a word. You will hear the subtle shift in tone that signals manipulation. You will smell the faint scent of emotional danger, the way an animal smells smoke long before the fire reaches the forest. Because healing is not forgetting. Healing is remembering without bleeding. It is carrying the memory of the fire and learning how to detect its smoke from miles away. Jung called this the process of individuation, becoming whole by integrating what you've rejected, feared, or buried. When you integrate your wound, you no longer seek its reflection in others because you have reclaimed it as part of yourself. You stop craving the impossible apology from the past. You stop confusing pain with passion. You stop assigning strangers the role of savior or executioner. And when you stop doing that, something incredible happens. You become untouchable in the realm of love. Not untouchable as in cold, or guarded untouchable as in unshakable. The games people play no longer work on you. The hot and cold lovers find you boring because you will not dance in their storms. The narcissist loses interest because you will not bleed when they cut. This is the ultimate freedom. To love without needing. To connect without clinging. To stay without fear. And to leave without collapse. When you arrive here, you begin to see love not as a rescue mission, but as a meeting of equals. And from this place, you can offer something rare in today's world. Love without agenda. Not love as transaction. Not love as the quiet begging to be chosen. But love as overflow, the natural outpouring of a self that is already full. This is the kind of love that terrifies people still trapped in their wounds. Because it cannot be manipulated. It cannot be seduced by intensity. It does not beg. It does not bargain. It does not build its home in someone else's unstable hands. And when you embody this, something else happens, something Jung understood but few dare to live. You become magnetic, not because you are chasing, but because you are standing still, whole, rooted, unshaken. People will feel the solidity in you like a mountain feels the wind. Some will try to conquer it. Some will try to worship it. But the wise ones, the healed ones, will want to stand beside it. This is how the wound, once your greatest liability, becomes your greatest power. It stops being a weakness that drives you into the arms of the wrong people and becomes a shield that keeps them out. It stops being a craving for completion and becomes a compass pointing only toward what is true. And here's the final twist in this alchemy. You realize that all along, the wound was never here to destroy you. It was here to guide you back to yourself, to force you into the depths you would never have dared to enter without pain as your torch, to strip you of illusions until you could see the truth naked and unadorned, that no one on this earth can complete you, that no love is real until it is chosen from freedom, not from hunger. When you stand here in the center of yourself, you are no longer the seeker. You are the found. To reach this state, you must begin with an act most people will avoid for their entire lives. You must turn around and face the shadow, not glance at it, not intellectualize it, not dress it up in polite language, but face it as it is the raw, unfiltered truth of the parts of you that are jealous, angry, needy, desperate, manipulative, controlling, afraid. All the impulses you've denied because they didn't match the image you wanted the world to see. This is where the real work begins. Because the shadow does not dissolve. When ignored, it grows teeth. And in love, those teeth sink into every relationship you enter until you acknowledge them. Jung understood something modern culture resists. The more you deny your shadow, the more you project it onto others. You see selfishness in them, but not in yourself. You see abandonment in them, but not in the ways you abandon yourself. You see manipulation in them, but not in the subtle ways. You twist reality to make yourself feel safe. This projection keeps you blind, and it keeps you powerless. The first discipline is radical self-confrontation. Not blaming others, not rewriting the past to make yourself the eternal victim, but asking, what is my part in this pattern? Not to take on guilt for things that weren't yours, but to reclaim the parts that were. Because whatever you refuse to own will own you. The second discipline is emotional sovereignty. This means no longer outsourcing your worth to someone else's attention. No longer letting a text message determine the weather inside your chest. No longer collapsing into despair because someone withdraws their affection. You learn to hold your own emotional state the way a warrior holds their weapon, with precision, responsibility, and control. This doesn't mean becoming cold or unreachable. It means you stop being a puppet to someone else's approval. And this leads to the third discipline, detachment from the outcome, not indifference detachment. The ability to stand fully in love while knowing you could lose it and still remain whole. This is terrifying at first, because the wounded heart believes love is survival. But when you've faced the shadow, when you've reclaimed your worth from the hands of others, you discover that losing someone cannot take you with them. Your center is no longer up for negotiation. The fourth discipline is discernment, the art of seeing clearly. When you're still in the grip of the wound, your discernment is clouded. You mistake chemistry for compatibility, attention for affection, intensity for intimacy. But once healed, you start to see the subtle tells of unhealthy love before you're entangled. You notice how someone speaks to the waiter. You notice how they handle being told no. You notice whether their eyes light up only when they're the center of attention. These small observations become your armor. And then comes the final discipline, integration. Integration means you stop dividing yourself into good and bad, worthy and unworthy, lovable and unlovable. You gather every piece, even the ones you swore you'd never claim, and you bring them home. You understand that the parts of you that once sabotaged love were not evil, they were scared. They were trying to protect you the only way they knew how. When you embrace them, they stop screaming for control. They lay down their weapons because they know they are safe with you. This is the turning point, because when the shadow is integrated, love changes form. It's no longer a battlefield where you fight for scraps of worth. It's a garden you tend, not because you fear it will vanish, but because it's beautiful to nurture something that grows beside you. From here, the desperation leaves your voice. The hunger leaves your eyes. You no longer radiate the silent question, will you complete me? Instead, you radiate the unshakable statement, I am whole. And those who come to you feel the difference instantly. The wrong ones back away. The right ones draw closer, not to fill a void, but to share a fire that already burns steady. And here's the paradox every healed person eventually learns. The more whole you become, the less you fall in love. You don't fall, you choose. You don't trip headlong into an abyss of longing. You step forward with both eyes open. And when you love this way, you are free. Free from the cycles, free from the ghosts, free from the wound that once ruled your every move. When you reach the final metamorphosis, love stops being something you chase or even something you have. It becomes something you are. Not the sentimental, hallmark version of love, not the saccharine, approval-seeking kindness that bends itself into exhaustion to be liked, but a deep, grounded state of being a love that is inseparable from your very existence. It is not contingent on who stands beside you or who walks away. It flows because you have become the source. This is the point where the wound, once an open, bleeding cavity, has turned into a scar you can trace with your fingers and smile at. It is a reminder, not a prison. The scar is proof that you entered the fire and came out forged, not burned. You can speak of the past without shaking, not because you've forgotten, but because you've transcended. And here's the most staggering part. When you are love, you no longer need to find it. This dissolves one of the deepest illusions in human relationships, the belief that love is something scarce, hidden, and given only to the lucky. When you are rooted in yourself, love becomes as abundant as air. Not everyone can receive it. Not everyone can hold it. But its existence in you is constant, untouched by the comings and goings of others. This is why truly healed people have an aura of quiet power. They are no longer negotiating for crumbs. They no longer orbit around the unpredictable gravity of another person's moods. They no longer perform for acceptance or swallow their truth to maintain peace. They live as mountains live, immovable, not because they refuse to love, but because they have learned the difference between surrender and collapse. From this place, relationships transform. There is no more begging for attention, no more silent tests to see if they care, no more punishing them with withdrawal or rewarding them with compliance. You are no longer playing games, because games are what the wounded play when they don't believe they can simply ask for what they need. And in this stillness, the people who are drawn to you change. You will not attract the takers, because there is no gap in you for them to exploit. You will not attract the volatile, because they find no spark to ignite their chaos. You will not attract the avoidant, because your presence quietly demands depth. Instead, you draw in those who are also whole, or at least committed to wholeness. People who meet you at eye level, not from above or below. People who don't need you to carry their entire soul, but who also don't vanish the moment things become uncomfortable. These relationships are not as intoxicating as the old wounded bonds, and that's their beauty. They are steady. They are real. They are free from the violent pendulum swings that once felt like passion, but were really just trauma echoing through the body. This is where love becomes an act of presence, not possession. You stop saying, "You are mine," and start saying, "You are here, and I am grateful." You stop measuring love by the fear of losing it. You measure it by the peace it brings while it exists. And when it leaves, as all things eventually do, you do not shatter. You bow, you release, you keep walking, because you have understood the deepest, most liberating truth of all. You were whole before them. You will be whole after them. And the love you carry within you is the only love that has ever been truly yours. When you stand in this truth, the world can no longer bargain with your heart. You become a sovereign in the kingdom of your own soul. And sovereignty is magnetic. It draws not just lovers, but opportunities, friendships, and moments of synchronicity that seem almost supernatural. Because life moves differently around those who are not in constant hunger. You are not chasing anymore. You are attracting by simply existing in alignment. And this is where the journey ends and begins again. Because to live as love is to live in endless creation. Every word you speak plants a seed. Every choice you make shapes the field you walk through. Every breath you take is a quiet rebellion against the story that told you love had to be earned. You know now, it was never about them. It was about the wound. And the wound, in the end, was about your awakening. And so we arrive here at the edge of the old life, the place where the last chains fall, where the ghosts you once chased turn into silhouettes in the distance, dissolving into nothing. You have walked through the fire. You have watched the illusions, burn the illusion that love would save you, that someone else could rewrite your story, that your worth was waiting in another's hands. You have seen the wound for what it was, not a curse, but a compass. And now you stand whole. Look at yourself. Not the self that begged, not the self that pleaded for scraps, not the self that traded truth for a moment of being chosen. That self is gone. In its place is someone unrecognizable to the person you used to be. A self forged in the silence after heartbreak, a self sharpened by clarity, a self that no longer bargains with its own soul. Do you feel that? That is your center, unshaken, immovable. It is the ground you stand on now, and nothing can take it from you. Not rejection, not loss, not the absence of the one you thought you couldn't live without. This is the untouchable mind, the unstealable heart, the unbreakable spirit. From here, you no longer move through life asking, who will love me? You move through life knowing, I am love. And those who come near you will feel it, the steadiness, the freedom, the quiet fire. Some will be drawn, some will run. It does not matter. You are no longer at the mercy of who stays or who leaves. Because you know the truth now, love was never about them. It was about the parts of you that needed to be seen, held, and healed. And you have given yourself that gift. So you walk forward not in search, but in sovereignty. Not empty, but overflowing. Not begging, but choosing. And in this choice, you are free. Forever.